What stage of perimenopause are you in? Now, it's not required that you have to know your stage, but it is really helpful to know where you are, to know where you're going. So this video, we're going to break down all about stage one. What is stage one? What is the true definition? What are the common symptoms? What lab work might show up? And then what are the other stages? Well, we'll touch on that too. Hi, I'm Dr. Carrie Jones, women's health and hormone expert. I absolutely know that hormones can feel like herding cats. Hit that subscribe button. I'm going to make sure to answer everything I can for you as you transition through perimenopause. All right, stages. Now, I have an entire video on all the stages of perimenopause. Technically, there are two according to the guidelines, but I think there are more like three, maybe even more than that. But today we're going to focus on stage one. So stage one and two were determined by something called STRAW, the Stages of Reproductive Aging Workshop. So a group of experts got together and said what's actually happening to women when they're in stage one versus stage two. In stage one, the classic definition is that your cycles are changing by about 7 days. So they're getting 7 days longer or 7 days shorter. Now, in my experience and the experience of thousands of women that I've seen on social media, that's not always the case. You may find that your cycles change a little bit. You may find that you go from a 28 to a 26-day girl or a 28 to a 33-day girl. So it's not quite a full 7 days, but you're definitely noticing that when your cycles are changing, they're getting just a couple days. Now, eventually that may lengthen out to a full 7 days where things are changing. You start getting your period on day 20 or day 21 instead of day 28. Or maybe it's going longer, right? Maybe you're getting your period now on day 35. But if you're starting to notice that your cycles are changing even just by a couple of days, and you're probably in that perimenopausal time frame, late 30s into your 40s, even into your 50s, you're probably in stage one of perimenopause. Now, because the shift is slight here at phase one, you may not know that what your labs are doing, and you may not feel a whole lot of symptoms. So in this sort of like phase one, stage one, you generally have regular cycles. You regularly get your period. You probably regularly still ovulate. You're probably regularly fertile if you wanted to go that route. So be aware, be very careful here. With this general regularity, if you go get your blood drawn, you will probably find your estrogen levels, estradiol, your progesterone levels, your FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, are probably in the expected range. You may find over time, though, so as you go from late 30s into your 40s, this does start to change. You may notice that you do ovulate, release the egg, but your production of progesterone is not what it used to be. So let's say you're listening to this, you're late 30s, early 40s, you're like, yep, absolutely, my cycles are starting to change a little bit. You get blood work done and your progesterone is like a 5 or a 3. When you get your blood drawn on progesterone, at least in the US reference ranges, you want it ideally to be like 10, double digits, 10 or higher. That indicates a really strong, robust progesterone production. Now, anything above 3 indicates ovulation. So if you were 3 or higher, you did ovulate, but if you're 3, 4, 5, you're down there in that like, yeah, she ovulated, but yeah, she's not making good levels of progesterone anymore. So you may find over time, even in stage one, that you go from great progesterone to not so great progesterone. That is not uncommon. In fact, it's very common for women to experience this. Estrogens, estradiol does not typically tend to decline here in the stage one part of perimenopause. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, is a hormone from the brain down to the ovaries, and it literally stimulates the follicles, hence its name, follicle stimulating hormone. It's usually below 10. If your cycles are regular, you still have follicles, still potentially fertile. As that number gets up into the double digits, 11, 12, 13, 14, up into close to 20, above 20, now we're moving through. Now we're getting more and more towards the mid to late perimenopause, and then eventually fully to postmenopausal. So as an early perimenopausal woman, you may have an FSH drawn. It is usually drawn on day 2, 3, or 4 of your cycle. This means you get your period, that's day 1. You go and get a blood draw on day 2, day 3, or day 4. They check your FSH levels and see what you are. If you're still in the single digits, that's not uncommon, even in early perimenopause. It means you are still have follicles, you're still making hormone, you are still considered fertile, actually. According to, do you have follicles and do you make hormones and do you ovulate? If we just look at that for fertility, obviously a lot more goes into fertility if that's a route you're still choosing to go for. Now, when it comes to symptoms, what are the symptoms you may experience? Well, they may be mild and they may be sporadic. So I would say in the perimenopausal stage 1, I tend to see sleep go first. So yes, your cycles may change a few days, but like the rest of your body, you may start to notice like, this is weird. I'm not sleeping that great in the second half of my cycle, the luteal phase anymore. Why would that be? You may notice that your mood is a little worse or more erratic, especially in the luteal phase, that second half. Maybe you're more irritated, maybe you're more anxious, maybe your depression is worse, maybe your PMS is worse. Maybe you are questioning if you have PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which can feel a lot in women going through perimenopause, especially when their hormones are changing. You may notice that your tolerance to alcohol, if you drink alcohol, is really starting to change. Whereas before you maybe could handle a glass of wine or two, didn't disrupt your sleep too bad, although I bet it was and you just didn't realize it. Now it is definitely affecting you. Maybe it's bringing on hot flashes. Maybe it's causing you to wake up in the middle of the night. Maybe it's making you not feel that great. Our liver enzymes do change as we go through perimenopause, which means that our ability to break down alcohol like we used to goes down. Now, hot flashes, night sweats. What about that? Hot flashes and night sweats can happen here. It is most likely to happen in the later stages as we get close to the full postmenopausal transition. As estrogen really does drop down, that's when I tend to see hot flashes and night sweats the most. It doesn't mean it can't happen here. It doesn't mean you may not get the sporadic one-off. It doesn't mean after a stressful day and a glass of wine that all of a sudden you're like, "Oof, I had night sweats all night long." That can absolutely happen. It is not really the keynote here. But you may also start to notice brain fog. You may start to notice that your ability to multitask, to recall things, isn't quite as sharp as it used to be. And again, it may come and go. It may be related to your sleep, to your stress, to your hydration, nutrition, all those things. But all of a sudden, you're like, that's so weird. Why can't I remember their name? They've been my friend or my neighbor or my old boss like forever. Why can't I remember their name? Or you go to do something. You go to open a tab on your phone, a tab on your computer. You have to stop. What was I just going to look at? What was I just going to look up? And it'll come to you, but it takes a minute, right? It takes a minute, whereas it didn't used to before. Or your ability to multitask and keep things, all the balls juggling in your brain, which, was amazing before. Now all of a sudden you're like, I should write that down. Dang it, I should write that down. You're using the lists app in your phone. You're using Post-it notes. You're using lists on the counter, on the refrigerator to keep track of all the things that you have to do. You've got your reminders set on your phone now, and it didn't used to be that way. It's because the changes of these hormones that are happening through your body also happen in your brain. Now, there are some oddball symptoms that may occur. You may notice that you get itchier ears, drier, itchier ears. You may notice some phantom smells that come and go. You may notice some muscle pains or joint pains that come and go. Nothing necessarily in stage 1 sort of hangs out long enough, especially in the beginning, for you to immediately clue in and go, oh, something's wrong, must be perimenopause. Often women report to me, myself included, as a woman going through perimenopause, it's slow and subtle, then it starts to build. So I want to make this video so you understand in phase 1, if you're like, gosh, I had itchy ears last week. I thought maybe I'd eaten something. Maybe you did, but maybe it's where you were in your cycle and your hormones shifted just a little bit harder than they did the cycle before. Maybe you were sleeping pretty good and you're like, gosh, that's so true. I've been noticing I wake up at 3 a.m. on the dot. Is it stress? It might be. It might be, but it may also be the shifting hormones. So by understanding this is where you are in perimenopause, 1, it clues you in that you're perimenopausal. And 2, it clues you in that you are in the first stage of perimenopause. And now you can get a better idea of where am I and where am I going. Now, as I said, I have an entire video on all the stages that you can watch that will help you, but I really want to dive into each stage individually so that you know what you're going through, what you're up against, and then what's coming. Please remember, perimenopause is not a disease. It is a natural state that if you still have your ovaries and uterus, women are going to go through. It is not a disease state at all. There's no quote unquote diagnosis per se of perimenopause. But again, it is helpful to know here's where I'm at, like a map, here's where I'm at, and then here's where I need to go. Here's what's happening for me and the symptoms that I'm going to experience, or the labs if I go get lab work drawn. Now, in the early stage of perimenopause, this is the point where you need to double down on all the things. And this is what women don't want to hear. This is the point where you have to stop burning the candle at both ends. This is the point where you maybe need to reconsider alcohol if you drink alcohol. This is the state where you need to really increase your protein. Protein is so important because of a particular amino acid in it called leucine. And leucine is a muscle growth or muscle stimulus. As women progress through perimenopause, especially as they go through entirely to become postmenopausal, they tend to lose their muscle mass. It's called sarcopenia. So they gain more fat tissue and lose their muscle mass. And we absolutely don't want to do that. We want to go the other way. We want to build and maintain our muscle and keep our fat to a normal, to a typical, to an expected. And we especially don't want that visceral fat. That's the fat that's around our organs. That's very inflammatory fat. We have different kinds of fat in our body, and the visceral fat kind is the kind we're trying to minimize as best that we can. So this is where prioritizing protein is important. This is also the part where you really want to start prioritizing exercise if you haven't. Get out there and get walking, lifting weights, doing resistance training is going to help your bones, it's going to help your heart, it's going to help your brain, and it's going to help, of course, your muscles. This is also the part where you definitely want to invest in your community. Women, as they go through perimenopause, the hormone shifts can make us feel more stressed, less interactive, less extroverted. And if you are not an extrovert to begin with, you may notice that you are becoming more withdrawn. You don't find joy in going out with friends or family as much as you used to. And so we want to hold on and preserve that because we know from the literature that the people, women, men and women actually, who have a community, who have friends, relationships, family, however that looks, tend to thrive longer and live longer. So we want to set those habits now. Now, of course, if you have any other habits that maybe it's time to let go of or to reevaluate, now is the time. Because the more you can set yourself up for success as you go through perimenopause into the full postmenopausal transition, the better, the easier it's going to be, the more normal that you're going to feel in a sense as you're making this transition. So I hope this video was helpful. Again, this is the stage one, the first stage of perimenopause, to clue you in like, oh my gosh, it's happening, right? As they said in The Office, as Michael Scott says, it's happening, it's really happening. Going around ring the alarm, but you can be very proactive here and you can really help understand and monitor your blood work, your hormone looks, your even everything like your thyroid. Make sure that you're getting regular, at least yearly blood work on things like your thyroid, your vitamin D, your B12, your white blood cells, your red blood cells, your liver markers, your lipids, cholesterol, glucose, because these can all change for the worse as you go through perimenopause. And if you don't have an eye on it, you won't know. And we're trying to prevent things that are going to happen in your future that will ruin your ability to thrive, right? I don't want you to get heart disease. I don't want you to develop diabetes. I don't want you to get dementia. So let's minimize risk as much as we can. So if this video helped, definitely give us a thumbs up, comment below, ask any questions. I make these videos for you because we just are not taught enough about perimenopause, and I want everyone to know, men and women alike, what it's like going through it, what we can do, what to look for, labs, all the things. So thank you so much. This is stage one perimenopause. Be on the lookout for the stage two and my video on all the stages as a summary.